When I asked my daughter what time the engagement dinner was that evening, she paused, her eyes drifting away for a moment before she blinked slowly, and with nothing more than a casual shrug, she said, "Oh, we had it yesterday, Mom." Just like that. No apology, no explanation. Not a trace of regret in her voice. I stood frozen in my small kitchen, my hands still damp from the dishes I had been washing. I had prepared a dish chicken and rice, Emma's favorite since childhood, with the quiet excitement that tonight I would finally sit at a family table again. Yet, with one sentence, she erased all of that hope. At first, I thought I had misheard. Surely she didn't mean what she said. But her voice was too calm, too real. And the silence that followed cut deeper than any scream ever could. "Yesterday?" I whispered, my voice trembling, sounding almost foreign to my own ears. "Yes," Emma replied evenly. "It was just easier that way. Don't take it personally, Mom. Easier." The word carved into me like a brand. Easier for her if I wasn't there. Easier for her if the woman who had cradled her through sleepless nights, who had skipped meals so she could eat, who had sold precious keepsakes to pay for her education, simply wasn't present. I drew in a long breath, forcing my voice not to break. "I see," I answered, though I saw nothing at all. When the call ended, I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the faded wallpaper Donald and I had chosen decades ago. Donald had been gone more than 10 years. But in that moment, the loneliness of widowhood tightened around me like a vice. I could almost hear his voice whispering, "Sit down, love. Breathe. Let it go." But how can a mother let go, especially when it feels like her own child has already let go of her? The chicken and rice still sat warm on the counter. I had pictured Emma's smile when she caught the familiar scent from her childhood. Now, it sat there like a cruel joke. I placed it gently on the dining table, the same table where Emma and I had shared bowls of cereal before school, dyed Easter eggs, whispered late-night secrets about her first crush. That table had witnessed every chapter of her life. And now, it bore witness to the quiet shattering of my heart. Memories surged over me like a tide. I remembered the night Emma was 7, burning with fever, and I rocked her for hours in the old chair, humming lullabies until she finally drifted to sleep. I remembered the day she tried on her wedding dress, twirling in front of the mirror, her eyes sparkling as she asked, "Do I look beautiful, Mom?" I had cried then because I saw Donald in her smile, and I remembered selling Donald's beloved vintage car. My hands had lingered on the steering wheel one last time as I whispered, "Donald, you'd understand. Emma needs this." I remembered cashing out the retirement fund I had built through decades of teaching, just so she and her fiancé could have their first home. I remembered the care packages I mailed after she moved out, always slipping in cookies and a handwritten note. "I believe in you, always." But lately, the phone calls had grown shorter. The texts, less frequent until they vanished altogether. The cheerful promises of "maybe this weekend" never came true. I had told myself she was busy, that wedding planning was overwhelming, that I only needed to be patient. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't about being busy. It was about erasing me. Somewhere along the way, my place in her life had shifted from center to edge, from essential to expendable. I had become invisible in the very life I had poured myself into. Outside, the world went on. Children laughed as they pedaled their bikes, neighbors watered their lawns, couples walked their dogs. Their laughter floated in the evening air, the same kind of laughter that once filled this house when Donald was alive, when Emma was small, when family was the heartbeat of our days. And I sat there, a stranger in my own world. Bitterness rose in my throat, heavy and sharp. I could taste the years of sacrifice, birthdays where I went without, so she could have more, late nights grading papers while Emma slept peacefully, every silent choice to ensure her life was brighter than mine. And now, it had all come down to this: an engagement dinner held without me. I whispered into the emptiness of my kitchen, Maybe. I was never enough to sit at her table. The words echoed back, like a cruel confirmation. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the untouched meal. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. Time lost its meaning when the thread of belonging had been cut. In that heavy silence, a part of me quietly died. But deep within, something fragile stirred. A faint ember whispered, "You cannot let this be the end of your story." I couldn't name it then. But later, I would realize that night was the beginning of something, a reckoning, a transformation, perhaps even a rebirth. For now, all I could do was sit in my quiet kitchen, clutching a dish towel like it was a lifeline, while the world outside carried on as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. My name is Margaret Reynolds, and I am 65 years old. Every dawn, before the street begins to stir, I catch my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. My silver hair is loosely secured in the same bun I wore in my teaching days. My face is framed by lines, some call them smile lines, but to me they are the carvings of a lifetime of silent endurance. They mark nights of pacing my living room when Emma was sick, mornings of endless lesson planning, and afternoons spent whispering words of pride to a child who at the time was my everything. I am slender still, though age has softened my figure. My clothing is modest, cotton dresses I picked up from thrift stores, a well-worn cardigan, sensible shoes that prioritize comfort over style. My husband Donald used to joke that I could twist a dime until it screamed. And though sometimes his words pained me, they also made sense. I believed frugality was a virtue, especially when you lived modestly and loved generously. For 35 years, I taught elementary school third graders, specifically. I tied shoelaces, calmed tears, explained the difference between there, and there. But that was my secondary classroom. The real classroom was home, with my daughter Emma as my only student. She was the reason I taught, the heartbeat in my years after Donald passed. When Donald died 12 years ago, I thought it would bring Emma and me closer. She was a junior in college, working 2 part-time jobs to get by. I sold Donald's vintage car, his Sunday ritual of polishing. It was sacred to cover her tuition. Standing in the garage, I whispered, "You'd understand. Love, I'd trade anything for her future." When the life insurance came through, I poured every dollar into her education. Later, I withdrew what remained of my retirement savings to help her and her fiancé secure a modest down payment on their first home. Relatives warned me I was being foolish, but mothers don't measure generosity. We give love without asking for receipts or signatures. We hope that love will come back in forms beyond words. For several years, it did. Emma called weekly. We'd laugh over her new recipes, chat about seedlings in her tiny garden, and dissect office dramas. I'd send care packages, cookies freshly baked, a knitted scarf, little notes in her handwriting-inspired cursive saying simply, "You are cherished." She would call right away, voice warm with gratitude, and my heart would swell. But that warmth cooled slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The calls shrank. "Sorry, Mom, I'll call later." Most laters never came. Texts dwindled until silence became her default. I blamed it on wedding stress, on life being busy. I told myself she'd return. But over time, the signs became unmistakable. At last spring's brunch, she introduced me to her new friends as someone I know. I laughed weakly, but inside, something fractured. Maybe she was embarrassed by my affordable dress or the secondhand purse I kept. A few days later came an invitation to her bridal shower, arriving 2 days after the party. "Lost in the mail," she said. Yet her eyes, cool and reserved, told me the truth. It wasn't lost. It was never sent. I see now how quietly I've been erased, like chalk lines brushed off a blackboard. I have been carefully, methodically written out of her life story. Now, I occupy a modest two-room apartment on the edge of town. It's tidy and full of soft morning light. One room is my sanctuary of books. I rescued them from Donald's library before I sold everything else. On the wall are two framed photos, one of Emma at 6, grinning with missing teeth in a homemade Halloween costume, the other of Donald, standing tall in his navy uniform, steady and kind. The second room is the kitchen, dominated by a dining table that is far too big for one person, but I insisted on keeping it. It's scarred and faded, but it's the same table where Emma spelled out her first words, where we dyed Easter eggs, where Donald carved a Thanksgiving turkey. I told myself it was a link to memory, but truthfully, I cling to it because it's one of the few physical things left of our life together. Each evening, I set the table for two. I place two plates, two glasses, one flatware set at each. I pour water into one glass and leave a folded napkin at the other side. Then I pause, staring at the extra seat. When did I stop being her mother and start being an obligation? I whisper that question into the silence, and the house answers with stillness. On waking, I follow the same routine. Pull on a cardigan, brew a small pot of tea, slide into a chair at that table. Meanwhile, outside, families emerge from houses, neighbors gather on front porches, children ride bicycles through the cul-de-sac I once walked with Emma. I used to imagine myself in those happy snapshots. Now I watch from my window, uninvited. I still volunteer at the community center 2 mornings a week. I pack sandwiches, fold extra sweaters into donation bins, and greet seniors who come for bingo nights. The center staff always thanks me, but lately, every time I pass someone with a young granddaughter, I swallow. Other people still have grandchildren. I answer yes when they ask, but on the inside, I want to whisper, I did too, but now she doesn't call. Paper packages still leave my apartment each month, care boxes, artifacts of hope, cookies, jam jars I made, a diary I think she might find comforting, sometimes an old book she once read in high school. I whisper to each box, find me if you remember my heart. She doesn't reply, but I still send them. Because hope, I've learned, is persistent, indelible. One night, I opened an envelope. She finally sent an invitation to a small bridal luncheon. Inside, a tight note. Sorry you couldn't make it. Wish you were there. It felt like a pat on the shoulder, a wave from the other side of deep water. I folded the RSVP card, wrote, thank you, I wish the same, and dropped it into my own mailbox. I waited for her call. None came, but that dining table remains. As I feed myself, simple meals, green beans, baked fish, perhaps the same chicken and rice recipe she once loved, I often catch my reflection in the polished surface, silver hair, gentle eyes, a small tremor in my fingertips, and the empty chair across from me that mocks me with all its weightlessness. Visiting Donald's photograph at night, I kneel and say, I gave her everything I could give, might even have given too much. But no matter what, I don't feel seen. I press a hand to that photograph, as though I can transmit warmth through glass. His image is steady, his eyes kind. I imagine him saying, you are enough. You were enough. I hesitate sometimes to speak aloud into the empty air. Did I raise her to need me more than to love me? Did I teach her to depend on my giving and forget how to see me? The whispers fade quickly, drowned under the hum of loneliness. Still, I hold on to a flicker of hope. I replay in my mind the early years when she learned to ride a bike and returned with scraped knees, insisting she didn't want me to hold the handlebars. The time she cried because her school play got canceled. The day she moved out for college, tears in her eyes, promising she'd call more often. I believed her once. Some nights, I sit at that 2-seat table, my knees drawn close to my chest. I stare at the empty place setting. I remember all the dinners we had, the chicken pot pie she adored, the laughter when she dropped peas onto the floor, her frantic studies during final exams while I hovered, offering cold milk and comfort. Memories that once held us together now feel painfully fragile. A photo of her graduation sits on the kitchen counter. I walk past it slowly, hesitating. I thought that degree would bind us closer. Instead, when she smiled in her robe and cap, I believed she was smiling at me. But the world shifted somewhere, and I became a silent memory in her new chapters. Late at night, I sometimes whisper to the room. Maybe one day she'll remember who I was. Her mother, not her bank account, not her unpaid plates. But even that sounds foolish in echo. I keep sending hope in boxes and kisses into the void. You were always loved. Often, I wonder if the silent void will ever answer. Tonight, I sip tea at my worn kitchen table and stare at the empty chair opposite me. I ask once more, am I the forgotten matriarch now? A woman whose love overflowed, yet whose presence has been deemed unnecessary. And I do not know what tomorrow brings. But still, I remain two place settings, one life, and a heart too full to give up. There are moments in life when invisibility creeps in quietly. It doesn't arrive with grand gestures or loud announcements. Instead, it settles like a thin layer of dust, subtle, nearly imperceptible, until suddenly you realize you've been covered in it for years. That's how it has felt, becoming invisible in my own daughter's life. I noticed it most at family gatherings, or rather, what used to be family gatherings. When Emma was younger, holidays were sacred. Thanksgiving meant our little house, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, the dining table crowded with cousins and neighbors who had no place else to go. Christmas mornings were chaos in the best way. Wrapping paper flying, Donald reading aloud the story of the Nativity, Emma squealing with delight over a doll or a book. Now, those holidays pass in near silence. Last Christmas, I sat at my too big table, the one with a plate still set for Emma, staring at the untouched pie I had baked. I sent her a text. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm thinking of you." Hours passed. The phone stayed silent. When she finally replied the next day, it was a curt, "Thanks, Mom. Busy yesterday. Hope you're well." No photos, no phone call. Just words that felt typed out of obligation. Sometimes I try to rationalize. She has her own life now. She's planning a wedding. She has new priorities. But in my quiet apartment, the reasoning doesn't soften the ache. A few months ago, I heard through a neighbor of all people that Emma and her fiancé had hosted a barbecue for their friends. I wasn't invited. I tried to swallow the sting, telling myself it was just a casual get-together, not important. But when I saw the photos later on social media, Emma smiling, her hand entwined with his, a table filled with laughter and clinking glasses, I felt as though I had been cut out of a photograph I once belonged to. When did I stop being a part of her joy? I remember a time when Emma used to run into the kitchen just to share good news with me. When she got her first job at the bookstore, she came home waving the acceptance letter like it was a golden ticket. When she passed her driving test, she threw her arms around me, her cheeks glowing with pride. Even in college, she would call to tell me about a paper she had aced or a professor who encouraged her. I was her safe place, her anchor. Now, I find out about her life the same way strangers do, through filtered photos online or in passing comments from acquaintances. One afternoon, I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, the ones with raisins she always begged for as a child. I wrapped them carefully, added a note. "For my Emma. Love always, Mom." I drove across town, hoping to surprise her. When I rang the bell, her fiancé opened the door, smiling politely. "Emma's not home," he said. His eyes flicked behind him quickly, as if gauging whether to invite me in. He didn't. He just added, "She'll call you." I placed the cookies in his hands, pretending my heart wasn't breaking. She never called. Weeks later, when I asked if she'd received them, she said, "Oh, yeah. Thanks, Mom," as though it were an afterthought. That night, sitting at my table with Donald's photograph watching over me, I whispered, "Do I even exist in her world anymore?" The silence answered, "I still cling to our rituals, even if I perform them alone." On Emma's birthday, I baked her favorite chocolate cake, setting a slice at the empty place across from me. I closed my eyes, imagining her laughter as she blew out candles in years past. I whispered, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," into the quiet air. When I finally mustered the courage to call, she didn't pick up. Hours later, a text came. "Thanks, Mom. I'm out with friends." I wanted to be happy for her that she was celebrating, that she was surrounded by people. But deep down, I couldn't shake the sting of not being included. Sometimes, I look at my hands as I set the table veins more visible now, skin thinner, and I wonder if these are the same hands she remembers. These hands held her through fevers, braided her hair before school, clapped the loudest at her recitals. Do they mean nothing to her now? One evening, while volunteering at the community center, I watched a young mother tie her daughter's shoelaces. The girl leaned into her mother's shoulder, whispering something that made them both laugh. The sight brought tears to my eyes. I had done that once. I had been that mother. And now, I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of someone else's life. There are days when I try to convince myself I'm not forgotten. When a letter arrives from Emma, though rare, it feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. But the letters are brief, formal, almost transactional. "Thanks for the cookies. Wedding planning is stressful. Hope you're doing well." They are polite acknowledgments, not conversations. At night, I sit with Donald's photograph and confess my fears. "I gave her everything," I whisper. "Maybe too much. Maybe I made it too easy for her to forget me." I press my palm against the frame, pretending his hand is still there. I imagine him saying, "You are not invisible, Margaret. You are her mother. She cannot erase that." But then I remember her voice on the phone, casual and final. "Oh, we had it yesterday, Mom." And the ache deepens. Invisibility isn't about being alone. It's about being absent, where you once mattered most. It's sitting at a dining table set for two and realizing the second place is only a shadow. It's sending care packages into a void, never knowing if they are opened, let alone cherished. It's hearing about your daughter's milestones from strangers instead of her. And yet, every morning, I set that second plate. I pour water into the empty glass. I whisper prayers over boxes bound for her address. Because hope, fragile as it is, keeps me tethered to the belief that maybe, just maybe, I will matter again. Still, the question haunts me. Am I truly invisible now, in the very life I once gave everything to nurture? The silence between Emma and me wasn't always so vast. There was a time when her voice carried through the house like a song. "Mom, I'm home," she'd shout, running into the kitchen with flushed cheeks, eager to see what I had made for dinner. Chicken and rice, her favorite. I made it so often it became a part of our rhythm, a melody that stitched our days together. Now, the only rhythm in my apartment is the steady tick of the clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. The laughter is gone. The closeness is gone. What remains is an emptiness that has settled over me like a heavy quilt I can't shake off. I wander through old memories, the way some wander through ruins gingerly, careful not to cut myself on the jagged edges of what once was. I remember one summer when Emma was 8. She had scraped her knee climbing a tree. Her eyes watered, but she tried to be brave. I carried her inside, sat her on the counter, and cleaned the wound while whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Crying doesn't make you weak, it means your heart is full." She hugged me tightly then, her little arms squeezing with all the strength she had, whispering, "I'll always need you, Mommy." The memory hurts now, because somewhere along the way, always became never. The fractures started small, missed calls, vague excuses, unreturned texts. I told myself she was busy, that life was overwhelming. But each silence stretched longer. Each broken promise left a deeper mark. There was the Christmas, when I knit her a sweater, cream-colored with a rose pattern she had admired years before. I presented it with love, watching her eyes. She smiled politely, said thank you, and moved on. Weeks later, I found it untouched in her closet. That day, I felt something break not loudly, but in a quiet, irrevocable way. This past spring, she invited me to a luncheon. I wore my best dress, fixed my hair, even put on the pearl earrings Donald gave me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like the mother she could be proud of. But all afternoon, she avoided eye contact. When I shared a funny memory from her childhood, she cut me off with a laugh. "Oh, Mom exaggerates." Her friends smiled politely, then turned the conversation elsewhere. Later, I offered to help clean up. She waved me off, saying, "Just rest, Mom." So I sat quietly on the sofa, holding a glass of lemonade I never drank, while she laughed with her friends in the kitchen. On the way home, I gripped Donald's photograph from my purse, whispering, "She's slipping away from me, and I don't know how to hold on." That night, I didn't set the table for two. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the empty chair, asking myself, when did I stop being her mother and start being an inconvenience? Yet even as I wept, something shifted inside me. The loneliness had become too heavy to bear in silence. I thought of Donald and how he had lived his life with quiet dignity, but also with courage. He would never want me to disappear into shadows, erased from the very story I had helped write. And so, as I pressed my trembling hands together, I whispered into the night, maybe it's time I stop waiting quietly. Maybe it's time I remind Emma and the world that I am still here. The thought both terrified and steadied me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel only invisible. I felt the faint stirrings of resolve. Little did I know, that resolve would soon carry me into a moment that would change everything. I hadn't been invited. Not to the wedding, not to the rehearsal dinner, not even to the bridal shower. But I went anyway. There's something about being erased that eventually lights a fire inside you, not one born of vengeance, but of self-respect. I had spent too many months folding myself smaller and smaller, hoping my daughter would find space for me in her life again. But Emma had made it painfully clear she had no intention of making room. That morning, I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual. I wore a navy blue skirt suit, tailored and sharp. I hadn't worn it in years since Donald's funeral. In fact, but it still fit. My hair was swept up neatly, silver strands catching the morning light. I pinned on the brooch Donald gave me on our 20th anniversary, a golden rose with a pearl at its center. When I stepped into the sunlight, I didn't feel like a forgotten mother. I felt like a woman with a purpose. The bridal brunch was being held at an upscale country club on the edge of town. I had seen the location on one of Emma's friends' social media posts. The venue looked polished and airy, all glass walls and manicured lawns. A place for polished people. I didn't go alone. By my side walked Evelyn Hayes, my lawyer and longtime friend, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, soft manners, and a presence that made people sit up straighter. I had told her everything in the weeks leading up to this moment. Not just about the wedding, but about the years of neglect, the unanswered calls, the feeling of being rewritten out of my own child's story. "Are you sure?" she had asked. "Yes," I had replied, steady. Not out of spite, but because it's time, she understands I am more than a stepping stone. The moment we entered, silence fell. It was as if my presence had sucked the air from the room. Champagne flutes stilled midair. Laughter paused like a needle lifted off a record. Emma stood near the head of the long table, dressed in soft ivory, a crown of delicate flowers in her hair. Her eyes widened as she saw me, and then narrowed when she saw Evelyn. "Mom?" she said, her voice tight, strained. I walked forward calmly, heels clicking against the marble floor, every step a reminder. I am here. I will no longer be invisible. "Hello, Emma," I said, voice soft but clear. I turned to the room, raising a gentle hand in greeting. "Thank you for allowing me a moment." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. I could feel their eyes flick between Emma and me, trying to decipher the unspoken drama. Evelyn stood beside me, quiet but steady. "I won't take much of your time," I continued. "I came here today not to interrupt, but to make an announcement." Emma's fiancé, standing at her side, looked puzzled. Some of her bridesmaids exchanged wary glances. I drew a small envelope from my purse and handed it to Evelyn. She opened it and began to read. "I, Margaret Reynolds, hereby announce the creation of the Donald Reynolds Foundation for Daughters Without Mothers," Evelyn said, her voice firm but respectful. "This foundation, established in memory of my late husband, will offer scholarships, mentorships, and housing grants for young women estranged from maternal care girls who, through no fault of their own, have been left without the guidance, support, or presence of a mother figure in their lives." A few gasps. One woman covered her mouth. Emma went pale. I stepped forward again, my gaze steady on my daughter. "This isn't about blame," I said. "This is about legacy, about using my pain and the silence I've been handed to create something that speaks." Emma's mouth parted slightly. "Mom, what is this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "This," I replied, "is what happens when a woman who has been forgotten decides to be remembered not with noise, but with purpose." The room was so quiet, I could hear the wind outside. I continued. "There was a time I gave everything I had to someone I loved more than myself. I raised her. I fought for her education. I gave her a home, and later, I gave up mine so she could build hers. And when she walked away, I waited. For a call, for a letter, for anything. But silence became my answer." A woman near the end of the table sniffled. I didn't look at her. My eyes were on Emma. "And so, today," I said, "I take the love that was never returned and offer it to girls who need it. Girls who are told they are unworthy, unseen, unloved. My husband would be proud, because while his name may not live on in Emma's wedding toast or guest list, it will now live on in the lives of daughters who will remember him." I looked down, breath shaky but steadying, and nodded toward Evelyn. "We'll be formally announcing the foundation next week. I wanted you to hear it from me first." Then I turned toward Emma, her face blank, her mouth barely moving. She tried to speak, but no words came. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "You made your choices. I'm simply making mine." I walked out of the room with Evelyn at my side, our footsteps the only sound in the silence we left behind. I never expected the story to leave that room. I thought it would remain a whisper, a ripple among Emma's friends and her new in-laws. But by Monday morning, my phone rang nonstop. At first I ignored it, assuming they were telemarketers. But when Evelyn called, her voice urgent, I answered. "Margaret," she said, "you need to turn on the news." I did. And there it was, my name, my husband's name, and the foundation we had announced. A local news station had picked it up. They showed a photo of me at the country club, standing tall beside Evelyn. The headline read, "Mother Establishes Foundation for Estranged Daughters After Being Excluded from Child's Wedding." I sat frozen, the remote heavy in my hand. My story, our story, was out. The reporter's voice was calm but firm. "Margaret Reynolds, widow of the late Donald Reynolds, a beloved local teacher, announced a foundation in his honor this weekend. The Donald Reynolds Foundation for Daughters Without Mothers aims to provide scholarships and mentorship for young women who have lost or been distanced from maternal support. Clips played of people being interviewed outside the venue. A woman said, "I was there." You could feel the power in her words. It wasn't anger, it was love redirected. Another added, "I think she's brave. She turned her pain into something bigger than herself." My hands shook as I muted the television. I had done it for dignity, not for headlines. But it seemed the world had been waiting for a story like this. By Tuesday, the story had spread beyond our town. Regional stations picked it up. Soon it appeared online blogs, social media, even national outlets. People I hadn't spoken to in decades messaged me. Some wrote, "You've given me courage." Others shared, "I haven't spoken to my mother in years. You reminded me to call her." But not all messages were kind. Some called me attention-seeking. Others accused me of humiliating Emma. I tried to ignore those, but they stung. Late at night, sitting at my dining table, I whispered to Donald's photograph, "Did I do the right thing? Or have I lost her forever?" By Thursday, the calls grew harder to ignore. Old friends, former students, even strangers. But one conversation stood out most. It was with Linda Carter, a woman whose daughter had cut her off years earlier. She called in tears. "Margaret," she said, "I saw you on the news. You spoke the words I could never say. Thank you." I held the phone, my chest heavy. "I only did what I felt I had to," I whispered. "You did more than that," Linda replied. "You gave us a voice." The next day, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a social media post. Emma, smiling in her wedding dress, standing beside her husband. The caption, "Is this the cold daughter from the news?" My stomach dropped. Within hours, Emma's name was trending. Former classmates posted stories. "I went to school with Emma. Her mom never missed a recital." Another wrote, "She used to brag about how close she was with her mom. What happened?" The questions multiplied. Some comments were cruel. Others were curious. But the narrative had shifted. Emma was no longer just a newlywed. She was a daughter under scrutiny. I didn't want her hurt. That was never my goal. But for the first time in years, the world saw me not as invisible, not as forgotten, but as a mother who still mattered. That evening, Evelyn called again. "Margaret, we need to prepare. Reporters are asking for interviews." I closed my eyes, pressing my palms together. "I don't want to attack Emma," I said softly. "You won't," Evelyn reassured. "You'll tell your story. That's all." The following morning, I sat at my dining table with the second plate set across from me, a small vase of flowers in the center. A reporter sat opposite, microphone in hand. She asked gentle questions about Donald, about Emma, about the foundation. I answered slowly, carefully. "This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about turning silence into something that speaks. There are so many young women out there who feel unseen by their mothers, or who, like me, find themselves erased from the lives of the very children they raised. This foundation says, you are not alone." The reporter nodded. "Do you hope your daughter will reach out after this?" I hesitated. My throat tightened. "I hope she knows she is still loved," I said finally, "but I can't wait for a call that may never come. I have to live in the meantime. And I choose to live with purpose." When the interview aired, messages poured in again. Some praised my strength. Others questioned Emma openly. I sat in my apartment that night, the glow of the television casting long shadows, and whispered to Donald's photograph. The world knows now. But does she? Because through all the recognition, all the headlines, all the noise, one voice was still missing. Emma's. By the weekend, the headlines hadn't faded, they had multiplied. Margaret Reynolds became a symbol overnight, the forgotten mother who stood with grace, who turned grief into legacy. Articles with titles like, "The Woman Who Showed the World What Quiet Strength Looks Like," circulated online. On a morning talk show, A host even said, "This isn't just about a wedding. This is about what it means to be a parent left behind." But Emma was no longer shielded by silence. I tried not to read the comments. I tried to stay away from the noise. But one night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and searched her name. Her wedding photos were now flooded with replies. "Is this the one who iced her mom out? How do you not invite your own mother? I used to admire this woman. Now I just feel sorry for her husband." It went on and on. Some were crueler than I would ever allow myself to be. But the comments that struck me most were quieter. "My mom died before my wedding. I would have given anything to have her there. I haven't spoken to my mother in years. This made me cry." These weren't attacks. They were laments, regrets, wounds surfacing through my story. Emma, I knew, must be seeing it too. And I feared what it might do to her. 2 days later, I got a call from Linda again. "Margaret," she said, "I just ran into someone from Emma's husband's family at the market. They're talking. People are wondering how they never met you, how you didn't give a speech at the wedding, how no one even mentioned Donald." I held the phone, breathing carefully. "And?" "They're starting to ask questions, quietly, but they're asking." I wasn't sure how I felt. There was no joy in this. Not really. It wasn't revenge I had sought. Just truth. A place in the world where I could be seen again. Still, I worried, because the deeper the questions ran, the more Emma would feel the walls closing in. Later that week, Evelyn stopped by with a stack of letters. Physical mail, something I hadn't seen in volume for years. She placed the pile on my table, smiling gently. "Some of these," she said, "are from women who want to volunteer with the foundation. Others are from daughters who haven't spoken to their mothers in decades." I sifted through the envelopes. One caught my eye. Cream-colored, gold-trimmed. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. My breath caught. I opened it slowly. Inside, a short note. "Margaret, I don't know what happened between you and Emma, but I hope, someday, she sees what the rest of us now do. You remind me of my own mother. I was estranged from her for 10 years. She passed away before I could make it right. Don't let silence win." Tears welled in my eyes. I whispered to Donald's photograph. "Do you see what your name is doing? It's breathing again." But still, Emma hadn't called, hadn't written, not even a text. That weekend, I heard from a mutual acquaintance, someone from Emma's old school circle. "She's not handling it well," the woman said. "Her husband's parents are pressuring her for answers. They're asking why she never brought you around. Why your husband's name isn't even in the wedding materials." I closed my eyes. I never wanted to hurt her. "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes the truth wounds before it heals." That night, I made tea and sat on the couch. The television was off, the house quiet. I thought about the last time Emma held my hand. It had been years, maybe a decade. I remembered the warmth of her fingers in mine, the way she used to lean on me as a child. And I realized something painful, but real. I no longer wanted to go backward. I no longer wanted the daughter I once had. I wanted the daughter she could still become, but only if she chose to. The next morning, a knock came at my door. Soft, hesitant, like someone unsure if they had the right address. I opened it, and there she was, Emma, standing in the doorway, her eyes rimmed red, her hands clenched, her shoulders, usually so poised, slumped. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded slowly. "Of course, but not here, not yet." I stepped back and let her in, already knowing this conversation would change everything. When Emma stepped into my apartment, I felt the years between us hang heavy in the air. She hadn't been here since Donald's funeral. The same table stood in the center, the same curtains hung by the window, the same photograph of Donald on the sideboard. The only new additions were the stacks of letters from strangers, letters thanking me for the foundation. Emma glanced around, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from lack of sleep, I suspected, but from the pressure of being seen in a way she had never expected. "Mom," she began, her voice clipped. "Why would you do this to me?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Emma. Please." She hesitated, before lowering herself onto the seat. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was, the one who used to swing her legs beneath this very table, waiting for cookies to cool. But the illusion vanished as quickly as it came. "You humiliated me," she continued, her voice shaking. "In front of everyone, at the shower. Now the whole world thinks I'm a monster." I folded my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. "Emma, I didn't mention your name. I didn't accuse you. I only told my story. You knew what people would think," she snapped. "You knew they'd figure it out. Now my friends won't stop calling. His family is looking at me like I'm a stranger. And I can't even post a picture without people calling me the cold daughter." Her words cut, but I didn't flinch. I had imagined this moment for days, how I would respond, what I would say. "Emma," I said softly, "you embarrassed yourself the day you erased me from your life." She froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence between us stretched long. Finally, she whispered, "That's not fair." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "Not fair? Emma, I sat alone at Christmas while you celebrated without me. I baked pies and cakes that went untouched. I sent packages, cookies, scarves, notes never knowing if you even opened them. I watched from a distance as you built a life, as though I had never been part of the foundation of it." Her eyes flicked away, staring at the vase of flowers on the table. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I shook my head gently. "Intentions don't erase impact. You chose silence. You chose absence. And you thought I would simply fade away." Her hands tightened into fists. "You don't understand. It wasn't about you. It was easier." "That word again," I interrupted softly. "Easier. Do you know how many times I've replayed the sound of you saying it? It was easier without you. Emma, I gave up my security so you could go to college. I sold your father's car so you could pay your tuition. I poured my life into yours. And when the time came, you decided life was easier if I didn't exist in it." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked down at her lap. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. "Mom," she whispered, I wanted to start fresh. I didn't want people to think I still needed you." My throat tightened. "Needing someone doesn't make you weak, Emma. It makes you human. I never asked you to need me forever. I only hoped you wouldn't erase me." She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "And now? You've made me a spectacle. Everyone's talking about me. They don't see me. They just see the daughter who abandoned her mother." I let the weight of her words hang in the room before answering. "And whose choice made that true, Emma? Mine or yours?" She flinched as if struck. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I reached for Donald's photograph, holding it gently between us. "Do you remember him reading bedtime stories? The way he used to lift you onto his shoulders at the fair? He would be heartbroken to see this distance between us. But he would also remind you, we are defined not by appearances, but by how we treat the people who gave us life." Her tears fell freely now. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would notice." "That's the thing about invisibility," I said quietly. "It hurts because we notice. Even when you don't. Every silence, every absence." I noticed. For a long time, she said nothing, just sat there, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up, her voice small. "What do you want from me, Mom?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't want apologies spoken out of fear. I don't want appearances for the sake of saving face. What I want is honesty, respect, acknowledgement that I matter, not as a guest on your list, not as a chore to manage, but as your mother. She nodded faintly, her shoulders trembling. I don't know if I can fix this. You don't have to fix it all at once, I said softly. But you can start with one choice, one call, one seat at your table. Her eyes lingered on the second plate I had set, as I always did. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on it, fingers trembling. Can I stay for dinner? She asked. My breath caught. I nodded, unable to speak. I rose and moved to the kitchen, pulling out the chicken and rice I had prepared earlier, as though some part of me had been waiting for this moment all along. As the meal warmed, I whispered silently to Donald's photograph. Maybe this is not the end, love. Maybe this is the start of something new. And though I knew the road ahead would not be easy, for the first time in years, the second plate at my table was not empty. The chicken and rice steamed softly on the table between us, the aroma filling my little apartment, just as it used to fill our family home years ago. Emma sat across from me, her eyes still rimmed red, her shoulders tense. I could see she was uncomfortable, not because of the food, but because of the unfamiliarity of sitting here again, at the table she had avoided for so long. I didn't press her with questions. I didn't scold or beg. I simply served her plate, just as I always had, and whispered, "Eat while it's warm." She picked at the rice at first, silent. I wanted to fill the quiet with words, to bridge the canyon that had grown between us, but I stopped myself. Healing, I realized, doesn't happen in speeches. It happens in moments, small, steady, patient moments. Finally, she spoke. It tastes the same, she said softly, not meeting my eyes. I smiled faintly. Some things don't change. Herr Farkstille. For a moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, the one who used to swing her legs under this table, giggling when Donald sneaked her an extra cookie after dinner. We ate in silence for a while, and though the quiet felt fragile, it was not as heavy as the silences before. This silence carried possibility. After dinner, she helped me clear the dishes. It startled me she hadn't done that in years. As she dried a plate, she whispered, "Mom, I don't know how to undo all of this." I touched her arm gently. You don't have to undo it all at once. You just have to take the next step. She nodded faintly, her eyes glistening. That night, after she left, I sat alone again at the table. But for the first time in years, the second plate wasn't untouched. The empty chair no longer felt like a tombstone. It felt like a doorway cracked open. In the days that followed, Emma didn't call often. But when she did, it wasn't out of obligation. One evening, she rang just to ask for my recipe for oatmeal cookies. Another time, she sent a text. Thinking of you today. They were small gestures, but to me, they were treasures. I found myself smiling more often. When I walked to the community center with care packages, I no longer felt like I was carrying hope into a void. I felt like I was also carrying it for myself. The foundation had taken on a life of its own. Volunteers signed up, donations came in, and Evelyn kept me updated on scholarship applications. I read the letters from young women who wrote, "Thank you for reminding me I matter." Their words filled the emptiness Emma's silence had once left. One Saturday, Emma surprised me by asking if she could join me at the center. She spent the morning handing out lunches, chatting with the other volunteers. Watching her laugh with the girls reminded me of the Emma I used to know. On the walk home, she said quietly, "They look up to you, Mom." I chuckled softly. I just try to show up. That's more than enough sometimes. She glanced at me then, as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, she whispered, "I haven't been good at showing up for you." The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I only nodded. "But you're here now." Her eyes glistened as she nodded back. That night, I sat with Donald's photograph on my lap. She came to the center, I whispered. She's trying. For the first time in a long time, I didn't imagine his voice saying, "Let go." Instead, I imagined him smiling, proud. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be setbacks. There would be days when she retreated into silence again. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a series of steps, some forward, some back, but always moving toward the light. And I realized something I hadn't before. This journey wasn't just about Emma, it was about me. For too long, I had measured my worth only through her eyes. I had forgotten that I was more than a role in someone else's story. I was a woman with her own story to tell, a teacher, a wife, a friend, a founder, and yes, a mother. Always a mother, but not invisible anymore. As I set the table the next evening, I placed 2 plates again, this time not out of habit, not out of longing, but out of hope. Because healing had begun not in grand gestures, not in perfect reconciliation, but in the quiet act of showing up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a fragile bridge, each step cautious, yet each one stronger than the last. Emma didn't suddenly become the daughter I once knew, and I didn't expect her to. But there was a shift, subtle yet undeniable, like the slow turning of seasons. One evening, she called me just to ask how my day had been. Not because she needed something, not because there was news to share, just because she wanted to hear my voice. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but it was enough to remind me that bridges aren't built in a day, they're built one plank at a time. The foundation flourished. Letters continued to arrive from young women across the country. Some shared stories of estrangement, others of reconciliation. Many wrote simply to say, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." Reading their words, I realized that my life had expanded beyond the quiet ache of invisibility. I had become part of something larger, something that carried Donald's name into the future in a way he would have loved. Emma visited again, this time on a Sunday afternoon. She knocked softly, holding a bouquet of daisies, my favorite. "For you," she said shyly, as if unsure whether the gesture was welcome. I smiled, taking the flowers and placing them in a vase at the center of the table. "They brighten the room," I said. She glanced at the second plate I had already set, then looked back at me. "Do you always set it?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I admitted. "At first it was for you, a reminder. Then it became, for me, a way of saying I still believed." She nodded slowly, her lips pressing together. "I see it now, and I'm sorry." I reached across the table, touching her hand gently. "The table was never about guilt, Emma. It was about hope." We sat down to eat together, the daisies smiling at us from the vase. For the first time in years, I felt the weight in my chest lift, just a little. That evening, after she left, I sat with Donald's photograph, as I often did. "She brought flowers," I whispered. "Can you believe it?" I imagined his smile, the warmth in his eyes. "She's trying," I added softly. The truth was, so was I. I began to do more for myself. I joined a book club at the library. I took walks through the park, where the autumn leaves painted the world in gold. I even started knitting again, not just scarves for Emma's packages, but blankets for the community center's donation drives. For years, I had lived as though my worth depended solely on Emma's recognition. But now, I began to see myself through a different lens. I was still Margaret Reynolds. I was still here, and I still mattered. Emma noticed the change, too. One day, as we sat together folding letters from foundation applicants, she said, "You seem lighter, Mom." I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally remembered I'm more than just someone's mother. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you'll always be mine." The words wrapped around me like a soft blanket. Not perfect, not a promise of forever, but enough for now. Months passed. The foundation held its first scholarship ceremony in the high school auditorium where I had once taught. I stood on stage, the same wooden floorboards that had echoed with children's footsteps years ago, and addressed a crowd of young women, parents, teachers, and donors. This isn't just about money, I told them. It's about being seen. It's about knowing that no matter who has walked away from you, your story is not over. You matter. From the corner of my eye, I saw Emma in the audience. She wasn't hiding this time. She clapped, her eyes glistening, and when the ceremony ended, she walked up to me and hugged me. Not a polite hug, a real one, the kind I hadn't felt in years. "Dad would be proud," she whispered against my shoulder. Tears stung my eyes. "So would I whispered back. That night, as I set the table again, I placed 2 plates as always. But this time, I added a small vase with the daisies Emma had brought me weeks earlier, now dried but still beautiful. I whispered to Donald's photograph, "We're finding our way back." Healing, I knew, was not a destination but a path. Some days would be harder. Some silences would still sting. But the weight of invisibility had lifted, replaced by a steady, fragile light. I was no longer just the forgotten matriarch. I was a woman renewed through love, through loss, through the quiet resilience that had carried me this far. And as I sat at the table, the second plate waiting, I realized something. Even if the plate stayed empty some nights, I was no longer afraid of the silence, because I had learned to fill it with purpose, with hope, and with the knowledge that I was enough. If you have followed my story from being left behind to finding my voice again, I want you to remember this: you are not invisible. For years, I believed my worth depended on being needed. I gave everything for my daughter, and when she turned away, I felt erased. But I have learned something precious. Our value does not disappear just because someone stops seeing it. If you have ever sat at a table with an empty chair, waiting for someone who never came, if you've checked your phone, praying for a call that never arrived, please know this: your love still matters. You still matter. Healing doesn't mean the pain vanishes. It means we keep moving forward, choosing purpose over silence, grace over bitterness, hope over despair. That is why I built the foundation, to take my brokenness and turn it into light for others. And in doing so, I discovered that my life still holds beauty and meaning. So if you are hurting tonight, hold on. You are not alone, and your story is not over. If this touched your heart, I invite you to stay with me, subscribe, share this channel, and walk this journey of healing together. None of us were meant to carry our pain alone. I am Margaret Reynolds. I was once invisible, but I am still here, and so are you.